Dear friends in Christ, grace to you and peace. Amen. You know, with the mess that you've made of your life, none of that would be happening if you had more faith. You know, if you really believed in God, things that are happening, they wouldn't be happening to you. You know, why do you keep failing like you do? Because if you believed in Jesus, you know, they wouldn't be happening. You must not be a very good Christian. Well, you know, we're on week 7 of this sermon series that we've been talking about 10 things that Jesus did not say. And I have to say, at week 7 of these 10 weeks, this sermon series has not turned out the way that I had planned. I mean, really, when I was putting this together on the Sundays after Easter, I thought, well, it's going to be summer. I want to plan a nice, light, kind of fun summer sermon series when I can tell some nice stories and just be kind of nice and dazzle you with my great sense of humor. But it hasn't turned out that way. I mean, it has not turned out that way. Instead of having nice, light sermons during this summer, this seriously has been one of the most serious sermon series I've ever preached. I mean, it's serious stuff we're talking about. These 10 things that Jesus didn't say come from things that people actually think Jesus did say, and when we believe that he did say them when actually he didn't say them, we run into a lot of trouble. I mean, these things that Jesus didn't say that we sometimes think he did say cause a world of hurt and misunderstanding. And I think sometimes many of these sayings, these 10 of which we're talking about this summer, cast people away from Jesus rather than drawing people near to him. There are, I think, very serious misunderstandings about what it means to follow him. So I apologize that this isn't the nice, light, fun summer sermon series that I had planned, and that we're spending so much time talking about some very serious subjects. Today our saying that Jesus didn't say is, this wouldn't be happening if you had more faith. That's a very serious thing that Jesus didn't say. At the same time, I'm reminded of the story of a blind woman from birth who went to see her pastor, and she was in tears and crying and said to her pastor, you know, Pastor, I'm blind. I've been blind since birth. I don't know anything different from being blind, but I have really well-meaning friends who tell me that if I had more faith, I could be healed from my blindness. And the pastor said to her, well, do you walk with one of them that are white canes? And she said, well, yeah, I do. And he says, next time one of your well-meaning friends says that to you, take your cane, whack him upside the head, and when he says, ouch, say, if you had more faith, that wouldn't hurt. I like that pastor. I like that guy. But it does hurt when you're in a world of hurt and you get the sense, or someone says in an implying kind of way, that this wouldn't be happening if you had your faith. Sometimes that feeling comes in a very subtle way, like your friend, you hear that God healed your friend's mother of cancer, and she was a very faithful woman, and she prayed, and God healed her cancer, and your mom has cancer and still dies, and you think, should I have prayed her prayers? Did I have enough faith? Did I do things the right way? Or your best buddy gets a promotion at work and says, God answered my prayers, and you didn't get the promotion. And does your lack of getting a promotion mean that you don't have as much faith as he did, that you didn't pray the right prayers that he did? Or your friend tells you that the only thing that helped her make it through her divorce was her power of prayer, and yet you're going through a divorce and your life is shattered, and your faith in the living and loving God is at an all-time low. So would that be happening if you had more faith? It's a difficult thing. And I think to a large part, those things that we think are a lie. It's a lie to think that if I had more faith, all of these things wouldn't be happening to me. I think that it's the voice of the devil or Satan, the father of lies, that has a work to kill and steal and destroy. When you hear messages like we've been talking about this summer of things that Jesus didn't say, I think it's really the devil's work, because that's what Satan does. Satan accuses you with lies about yourself and tells you things that aren't true and beats you down, and in doing so draws you away from God. God who can heal you in the first place. When we believe those things, it draws us away from God. Because it's not true that you should let your conscience be your guide of the things that we've talked about this summer. It's not true that everything happens for a reason, that forgiving means forgetting. It's not true that you've gone too far to be saved, or God is so disappointed in you, or that this wouldn't be happening if you had more faith. Those are the things we've been talking about this summer. And when we hear those and believe those things, it starts to keep us at a distance from God, because who'd want to believe in a God who would do such things to us? I personally think that there's a boatload of people out there who believe these lies to be true about God, and that if they could just get in here and realize that God didn't say those things, that maybe they would begin a journey back to the heart of God, who's waiting for him to return, just like a loving father is waiting for the prodigal son to return. I mean, I wish those folks who believe these sayings to be true about Jesus realize that you can be a committed Christian and still have horribly difficult and challenging days. I really believe they knew that you can be close to Jesus but still be in a world of hurt and pain. I wish they knew that bad things happen sometimes because of our sin, yes, but sometimes bad things happen to us that have nothing to do with our sin or the way that we live. Sometimes just because you get allergies doesn't mean that God is punishing you. Just because you have a pink slip at work doesn't mean that you've fallen away from God's graces, and it wouldn't be happening if you had more faith. Just because you're going through struggles that maybe you don't even want anyone to know about, that you haven't even told anybody about, just because you're going through those kind of struggles doesn't mean that you lack trust or faith in Jesus. I wish folks out there who thought these things to be true knew that. I wish they also knew the story of the woman caught in adultery in John 8 with our gospel for today. The one I read a moment ago. It's a tremendous story. It's really one of the most important gotcha moments in the Bible. There's a woman who's caught in the worst of all circumstances, caught in the very act of adultery. Talk about the worst of circumstances. And it happened when Jesus was in the temple courts, which is the holiest place at that time. The adulterous woman is brought there by the teachers of the law and the Pharisees, and she's standing before Jesus and all of the crowds and the religious leaders and her neighbors and everything, and she's been caught in the very act of adultery, meaning that this isn't just a rumor, but she's been caught with somebody who is not her husband. You think you've had a bad day. I mean, put yourself in her position. You know, it was the worst day of her life, but on the other hand, as it turns out, it was the best day of her life. Because what happened to her brought her in touch with who God really is, and at the same time brought her in touch with who she really is. You see, standing before the teachers of the law and the Pharisees and the crowds and her next-door neighbors and the church council and everything, she had to face up with the reality of who she was, at the same time face the truth about who God was and who she could become. You know, you don't have to be in front of a crowd to face the truth about who you are, but at some point in life you have to. Face the truth about who you are. That's what happened to this woman. And once she did, she was able to embrace God's truth about who she was and about who she should become, and realize that this stuff wasn't happening to her because of her lack of faith. So let's look at some of the details of this story. Starting in verse 3. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and making her stand before all of them, they said, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. What do you say?" They said this to test him so that they might have some charge to bring against him. So here's Jesus. You know, you talk about being caught between a rock and a hard place. The rock was the Jewish law that those who were caught in adultery, not only the woman, but the man in this case, should have been stoned. The Jewish law said they should be face death by stoning. On the other hand, the hard place is the Roman law, which said that only the Roman officials reserved the right to inflict capital punishment. So the teachers of the law and the Pharisees say, "So Jesus, what do you say between the rock and the hard place?" If Jesus said, "Let's stone her," he'd be going against the Roman government. If he said, "Let's not stone her," he'd be going against the Jewish law. Jesus is between, very much so, a rock and a hard place. What does Jesus do? He bent down. He bent down and wrote with his finger in the ground. When they kept on questioning him while he was still writing, he straightened up and he said, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to cast a stone." And again, he bent down and wrote on the ground. Twice. I mean, just think, so what? I mean, what's that about? Jesus is being questioned. He doesn't say anything, but he kneels down and writes in the ground with his finger in his hand. Do you ever wonder what he was writing? I mean, so what's he... I mean, maybe he didn't want to rush into a decision, so he was just kind of doodling, taking a time out. Do kids ever have a time out? You know? You kind of go, you settle down a little bit. Maybe he was giving himself a time out. Maybe he was writing the sins of the accusers in the sand. Bill, you did this. John, remember when you did this. Maybe he was just giving them a moment. Remember, notice that they asked him twice. Maybe he was just giving them a moment to ask again and clarify in their minds what they were talking about. But maybe he was just realizing that those who were in the crowds needed to deal with their sin, needed to deal with their unfaithfulness, needed to deal with their not measuring up, focusing not on her sin so that they could avoid thinking about themselves. I think oftentimes when you're always accusing, you're never reflecting. When you're always thinking about how others don't measure up, you're not always reflecting on sometimes how you don't measure up. When you're being elitist about how great you are, you're not really being realistic about who you really are. When people say, this wouldn't be happening if you had more faith, the problem is that they're upholding their faith and they're degrading another child of God. So what happens next? When they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the elders. Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus straightened up. He said, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, sir." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go your way, and from this time on, don't sin again." You know, yeah, it was the worst day of her life, but it turned out to be the best day of her life. Because instead of Jesus saying to her, "This wouldn't be happening to you, baby, if you had more faith," Jesus didn't say, "You lousy excuse for a human being, no wonder all these people want to stone you." Instead of Jesus saying, "You know, I can't believe that you've done what you've done because you've gone too far to be saved." Instead of that, Jesus says, "You know, I don't condemn you. Go your way, and from now on, do not sin again." Instead of condemning her, Jesus brought her back into a loving embrace. Jesus did not turn her away, but rather turn her around. You know, the Apostle Paul says we've all sinned, all of us. and have fallen short of the glory of God. But in Christ, Paul says, we're new creations, called into a new life of discipleship, not to be turned away from Jesus, but rather turned around, turned toward him. The Gospel of John puts it this way. After John 3:16, our favorite Bible verse, John says, God didn't send the Son into the world to condemn it, but rather that the world might be saved through him. So when somebody says, or when you think that whatever it is might be happening if you had your faith, if you had more faith, it's like being a teacher of the law or the Pharisees who stood by ready to cast a stone or a rock at someone else. You know, that's so easy to do. But them is us. And most of us are like the ones in the crowd who stood with stones in our hands. And in many, many ways, the question is, what are you going to do with that stone? What are you going to do with that stone? Are you going to throw it at someone else, seeking maybe to justify our own sin? Because that's easy to do, like throwing a stone and saying, if you had more faith, like me, that wouldn't be happening. Or are we going to take those stones and throw them at Jesus because we don't like some of the things that he says, because they're challenging and difficult? That's also easy to do, and many people repel God's truth. Or are we going to look at the stones in our hands and remember that Jesus is the rock that we need to make it through life and to rely on? Are we going to look at the stones in our lives and realize that Jesus offered us the stability to make it day to day? Are we going to look at the stones in our hands and realize that when we surrender all, that he is our rock and our salvation? Are we going to realize that the troubles we have in life aren't because we don't have enough faith, but that whenever we do have trouble, that Jesus is right there, not wanting to condemn us, not wanting to turn us away, but turn us toward him. Children of God, let go of your hurt, leave your sin and guilt and shame at the feet of Jesus like the woman. Take up his burden of grace and let him deal with your fears of failure and your frustrations. His shoulders are broad enough to carry your sin and to address all of your concerns, and hold on to the stone of Jesus. Build your life on his solid rock, because you find when he's all you got, that he's really all you'll ever need. Let's join our hearts in prayer.